Right. So welcome everybody. Good evening. It's wonderful to see you all on a Sunday night. And of course, we are once again grateful to Bev for her time and for being with us here at South Caulfield and for really sharing her wisdom with us. Thank you very much, Bev. And welcome to everyone who's joined to learn and to be inspired. Some really good feedback from last week. So even if you missed last week, you'll still be able to enjoy tonight. And you can catch last week's on our YouTube channel. Let's look at Rabbi Raven, or you can find it on Facebook. It's still there. So, Bev, thank you so much. And of course, this week, Chanukah starts. So this will be interesting to learn as we go through and get ready for the actual festival, which starts on Thursday night. So I'll hand over to you, Bev, and we'll see you all at the other end of this awesome shiur.
Okay, hello, hi everyone. It's lovely to be here again tonight for the second part of the story behind the story of Chanukah. So last week we really spoke mostly about the background story of Chanukah and ultimately culminated in the dedication of the temple and the miracle of the lights. And we finished off with the death of Yehuda Maccabi. And this week we're going to continue with the story. So this week is actually not the Chanukah story. This is what happens after the Chanukah story. And actually this is the intriguing, crazy week. If we look at the story of the Hasmonean dynasty, it does not feel like you are watching Jewish history. This could be, and I don't know why someone has never made this into a movie, but this could be a Netflix movie, a really good miniseries. Actually, it needs at least six seasons and about 10 episodes in each season. But this is hard to imagine that this is a piece of Jewish history. This is a piece of our history. And I'm going to tell you tonight about this unbelievable intrigue that is the Hasmonean dynasty. So be prepared to be very switched on for this. It's a difficult talk to give because there are so many names and so many of the names sound the same, and they are mostly Greek names, and there's there's generations of the same name. So I know in the story, I have been to talks before on the Hasmonean dynasty, and the entire audience can get lost. So I am not going to allow you to get lost. I can't see you, but I'm going to try and keep you engaged because it is extremely engaging. Don't get confused with names. So seriously, pretend that you are actually watching a movie, and you're not going to remember everyone's name in that movie. So don't worry about the names. I'm just telling you in advance, the names are confusing, okay? But the story is insanely interesting, and if you love history, this is like on another level. Actually, if you love movies, this is on another level. So I'm hoping there's someone out there that is a movie buff that's going to maybe make a movie of the Hasmonean dynasty. Right. So last week we finished off, as I said before, with the death of Yehuda Maccabi. And I'm just going to give you a very, very, very quick synopsis for those of you that were not here last week, just to get a quick idea of the rise of how we got to the Hasmonean dynasty in the first place. This is like a 2-second synopsis. Well, no, a bit more than that. All right. So basically, we've got Alexander the Great, who in 336 BCE comes to power. He's from Macedonia. He unites the Greek cities together, or his dad had done that, but he continues to do that. And then he goes and expands his empire. And he literally expands his empire from the west, the known world in the west, all the way to like Afghanistan in the east, to India, to the Punjab. And he's got this giant empire, and basically he makes this whole empire Greek, right? This is the process of Hellenization. Hellen means Greek, and so Hellenization means to make everything like Greek culture. So he introduces art and science and maths, but also Greek gods, and the Greek form of paganism, also the love of the body, sports, the gymnasium, all of these things are built in Hellenism, which we discussed extensively last week. I'm not going to go into that now, but it's important to understand what it is. Basically, after then, he does invade, he invades Judea as well. And then, of course, he's a very young man when he dies. He dies with no heirs. And so his empire is then broken up into essentially three bits. It's actually a bit more than that, but three bits. The bits that affect us in the land of Israel are basically the Ptolemies, who are down in the bottom in Egypt, and the Seleucids, who are north of Israel in Syria. So we've got the Syrian Greeks, and we've got like the Egyptian Greeks. So when we talk about the Greeks in the story of Chanukah, they're not Greek. They are Hellenists, but they're not actually Greek people. These are Syrian people that we're talking about, or they are Egyptian people. And for many years, the land of Judea is ruled by the Ptolemies. They're ruled by Egypt. It's kind of soft Hellenism. After a while, the Seleucids take over, because Israel is like this little corridor of land between the two empires. And so, of course, they want Israel. And they take, I'm calling it Israel now, but it's Judea, essentially. The Seleucids take Judea and they introduce a harsher form of Hellenism. But essentially what happens is this is a civil war. So the story of Chanukah is actually not only a war against the Syrian Greeks. This is a war between Hellenistic Jews and traditional Jews. This civil war goes on for a while before Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV, who we know as the evil Antiochus from Chanukah, before he even comes into the story, the Jews are already having a civil war between each other, between the traditional Jews and the Hellenistic Jews. The Hellenistic Jews would like Judea to be more like any other Greek country, and the traditional Jews, of course, are Torah-keeping Jews. So this war is going on. Eventually, Antiochus says he's had enough. He would like to get rid of Judaism altogether, and so he initiates all these laws against Judaism, like no Shabbos, no bris, no Jewish holidays. And ultimately, Yehuda Maccabee, not Yehuda Maccabee, Mattityahu, who's Yehuda Maccabee's dad, revolts with his 5 sons, and they go and they fight these battles against this giant Greek army. And essentially, that is the miracle of Chanukah, that they could even try to win these battles. They fight a guerrilla warfare, and so that is how they manage. They know the terrain very well, and that's actually how they manage to win a lot of the battles. And so when they do win, they do lose some, but they do manage to claim Jerusalem and to rededicate the temple. And that is when they found that one crucible of oil that manages to last for, miraculously last for 8 days. And that is why we have the miracle of the oil on Chanukah. But after then, there's a number of other battles. And Yehuda Maccabee, who is Mattityahu's son, who's the general that is leading these wars, brilliant general and military strategist, he dies at the Battle of Elazar in 161, although some sources actually say 160. So there's always a year or two difference in the dates, depending on where I looked. I could find a year or two different. So that's where we got up to last week, and I've now just done 10 minutes of summary, not 2 seconds. Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing my screen just for a sec. I'm going to share my screen for a second, and you can have a look. That's where we started last week. Just to show you some sources of information. Where do we get this information? Where we know about Chanukah, we get it from the book of the Maccabees. We get it from Josephus, who was a Jewish general who then sort of went to go and work for Rome as a Jewish historian. And then also the Talmud has got some sources, and also, of course, archaeological digs. Now, let's talk about the 5 sons of Mattityahu. All right, so last week we spoke about Eleazar. Eleazar was killed in a battle. He was actually crushed by an elephant. Of course, the Syrian Greeks used elephants in battle. And Eleazar had decided the king was on top of one of these elephants and went in and stabbed the elephant. The elephant fell on top of Eleazar. So that was the end of him. Then Yehuda HaMaccabee, he was the first one. In English or in Greek, he's called Judas Maccabeus. Now, interestingly enough, you'll see when you see the shared screen that actually all of these people pretty much have got Greek names and they've got Hebrew names. So when we're thinking of this family of Hasmoneans, we think of this like a very frum priestly family, but of course they were, but they also had Greek names because they're living in the Hellenistic country. Yehuda is Judas Maccabeus, Maccabee meaning a hammer in Greek, and we know that Judah Maccabee, Yehuda Maccabee was like a hammer attacking like sort of hit and run attacks in the guerrilla warfare. All right, then following Yehuda Maccabee, when he died, there are now 3 remaining brothers. Yochanan is pretty much killed straight away by a Bedouin. They've had to flee Jerusalem, and this army of Maccabees is completely, or Jewish rebels is completely disillusioned. They have lost Jerusalem at this stage. They have to flee to the desert. They're now without a commander, and things look pretty much as bad as they did before Yehuda Maccabee actually won all the battles. So this is 5 years later, we're back to where we were before. And the reins fall to Yochanan. Yochanan, we were going to talk, not to Yochanan, they fall to Yonatan. Told you the names start getting confusing. So you can see I've listed 1, 2, 3. The reins then fall to Yonatan, who's we know in Greek or in English as Jonathan Athos. And then we've got the reins falling to Shimon after Yonatan is also killed. The reins fall on Shimon. He becomes the leader. He's the 3rd leader. He's actually the 2nd son. So he's quite old by the time he becomes a leader. And we can see he's called Simon Thassi. So because they've all got Greek names. And Yochanan was John Gaddi. So they've got Greek names and Hebrew names. The order goes 3rd son first, 5th son second, 3rd son, 2nd son third. Okay, and they're all killed. None of them die a natural death. Okay, so we are now going to talk about Yonatan. So Yonatan rules straight after Yehuda Maccabee is killed. But as I said, this army is decimated and very disillusioned, and someone needs to take over. So Yonatan, who's the younger son, is also a really good general. He's also been involved in fighting. They've all been fighting, and he then becomes the ruling brother. And some interesting things happen with Yonatan. So basically, I'm just going to show you this map here. You see the green. The green is the land that they had before, and then the pink is the land that Yonatan then manages to take. So you're going to see these maps come right throughout the talks, and you're going to see the pink keeps on increasing. So as the Hasmonean dynasty continues with each brother and then child and then grandchild, the map continuously gets bigger and bigger and bigger as they each take more and more territory. So, and of course, I've got all these pictures from a 16th century woodcut. So I doubt actually that they knew what Yonatan actually looked like. But just for your purposes, it's quite good to have a different face to each name. Others, as I said before, they all start sounding the same. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a second here. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about Yonatan, because straight after Yonatan takes power, the Sadducees sense this weakness and they decide to attack again. All right, and then now they attack, and that it looks like it's going to be the end of the Maccabees. And then that providence intervenes. There are miracles right throughout this entire story, and some not, but there are miracles right throughout. Providence intervenes, and things start happening in the Seleucid Empire. So the Seleucid Empire is full of brothers attacking brothers and usurpers to the throne, and suddenly the Seleucid Empire is in disarray. And Jonathan, who is a very, very clever, I called him the diplomat. Jonathan is a very clever diplomat, and he starts to negotiate with the different Syrian rulers. So whoever at the time he thinks is going to actually come into power, he negotiates with them. And so he doesn't actually land up having many battles, in fact, hardly any battles. He rules for nearly 20 years, almost no battles in this time, just negotiations. So he'll offer someone something, and then he offers someone else something, and he seems to play his cards right the whole way. Whoever he backs seems to come into power. And each time he backs someone, they give him a little bit of land. So he picks up all these pieces of land all around Judea without actually doing very much fighting. But he does, he is, as I said before, he's an excellent diplomat. But of course, he does make a mistake, as do many of this family. Okay, do you remember I said they all die bad deaths, that none of them die a natural death? So Yonatan, the fifth son, he's been ruling for a long time now, 160 to 142. It's a long time in power. He's managed to secure the area. It's much more secure than it was under Yehuda Maccabee. It's quite a peaceful, safe time, or at least people feel that it's a peaceful, safe time in Judea. However, the Seleucid Empire is crazy at the time. Like, there's a new king every couple of years, and so that the whole area is kind of unstable. But Judea is actually stable. And he manages to secure an independent state, and it is, as I said before, it's quite safe. But of course, he was an excellent negotiator. But unfortunately, he misread this man called Tryphon. Tryphon was another usurper to the throne of the Seleucid Empire, and Tryphon actually. Tryphon went into battle against Yonatan and Shimon and lost. And then he said, "Come to my castle in Acca and we'll negotiate the terms of the treaty. Like, I've retreated, but I'm going to negotiate, and I'll give you, I'll give you much more land, because of course you've won." And Tryphon, as soon as Yonatan arrives at Tryphon's castle in Acca, he is kidnapped straight away. He is held for ransom. Shimon, who's now the second brother, the only remaining brother, Shimon gets the ransom. He's all ready to hand the ransom over, and Tryphon kills Yonatan and takes the ransom money and sends back Yonatan's body in bits, in pieces. I told you this is like tragic and terrible. So that is what becomes of Yonatan. Okay, now things are in disarray again, because Tryphon's killed Yonatan. There is one more brother still remaining from this Hasmonean family, and this brother, oops, oh my goodness, let me just end here. Can you still see me? I've gone out of, am I sharing my screen? No, don't think so. I'm not sharing my screen. Okay. This brother is Shimon. I'm going to try and share my screen. If I can, share screen somehow disappeared for me. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. Let's try this. I'm going to go into Shimon here. You can see my slideshow now. You see if I can see. Yes, you can. Okay. So now we have Shimon, who is now the second brother, pretty old, and he now beats Tryphon, because he has to now fight a battle. He beats Tryphon, and now he starts to now the Seleucid Empire is in a complete mess, because now Tryphon has been beaten, and Shimon actually manages to achieve what the other brothers didn't achieve at all. He achieves peace with the Seleucids, an independent state, and he doesn't have to pay taxes anymore to the Seleucids, because the other brothers had to pay a large amount of taxes, and they also had to give soldiers tributes. So now Shimon's actually secured a really safe, good state, and Shimon becomes the Nasi, so the prince. He calls himself the prince, not the king. He calls himself the prince, and he calls himself, and he is also given the honor of the high priest. So Shimon is the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and he's the Nasi. Why doesn't he give himself, I'm going to unshare here. 1 second, I hope I can share again because my PowerPoint is getting smaller and smaller and smaller for me for some reason. Okay. Why does Shimon not call himself the king? So it's important to know, because the thing is that they come from the family of Aaron. That's why they're priests. The priestly family is from Aaron's family. But if you're going to be a king, you have to be from the lineage of King David. And these are from the lineage of Aaron. They're not from the lineage of King David. They're not from the tribe of Yehuda. So they can't be king. So you can see early on, they're not called king because they're still keeping Torah laws and listening to the rabbis. Later on, these Hasmoneans call themselves king because they don't actually care what the rabbis say. But at this point, Shimon is still very much a high priest, and he's a frum high priest. Okay, and he takes a little bit more land. He secures these borders. The people love Shimon. He's an excellent ruler. Okay, but there's always a but when it comes to the Hasmoneans. Shimon has got 4 children. He's got 3 boys and he's got a girl. And he marries his daughter off to a man called Ptolemy. Okay, you remember the Ptolemaic Empire? So that's not this Ptolemy from Egypt. It's just a Jewish person. His name was Ptolemy ben Chavov. This is a Jewish person that's got a Greek name. And the Greek name is after, the Ptolemies, who were the heads of the Ptolemaic Egyptian Greek Empire. So, all right, so you've now got the daughter married to Ptolemy ben Chavov. And as a wedding present, Ptolemy gets the city of Jericho, which is not quite in Judea. It's like a little bit outside of Judea. And Ptolemy is not happy with this at all. And he starts to negotiate with the Seleucid Empire. The emperor at the time, his name is, guess what? No, always a bad name. Antiochus the 7th. Okay, so we're a long way past Antiochus the 4th. He negotiates with Antiochus the 7th that they are going to finish off Shimon and his family, and Ptolemy ben Chavov is going to be the ruler of Judea, and he will be a Hellenistic ruler of Judea, and he will give everything to Antiochus the 7th. So he invites Shimon, who is this excellent negotiator, who's very smart, but just completely unsuspecting. He invites Shimon and his whole family to a banquet at his house in Jericho. I told you this is like Game of Thrones. This is not like what you expect from Jewish history. So invites them to this fancy banquet in Jericho. Shimon goes, and 2 of his sons go to the banquet, and of course his daughter's at the banquet and his wife. One of the sons decides not to go. Lucky for him, because when they get there, they're sitting down at this banquet and they get hacked to pieces. Shimon and not his wife, Shimon and the 2 sons are killed, murdered. The wife is held hostage. Now there's one other brother that's missing. He wasn't there. Ptolemy realizes he's not there. He hasn't come. And he sends people to go and murder the other brother. The other brother's name is Yochanan. Okay, now we've got another Yochanan, but this is now Yochanan of the next generation. We're going to know this Yochanan as a man called John Hyrcanus, who many of you may have heard of. He's very famous in Jewish history. John Hyrcanus the first, but he wasn't, obviously, didn't know he was called John Hyrcanus the first. John Hyrcanus is currently in Jerusalem, and he realizes that there is an attack against him. He's very clever and astute. And he kills the would-be attacker, and he understands his whole family has been killed, and he is the only one left from Shimon's family. So he straight away arrives in Jerusalem, calls himself the Nasi, and he says, okay, I am now in charge. But of course, like, he doesn't know how to, he's fought in an army before with his dad, Shimon, but he certainly doesn't know how to rule yet. He's got no power, he's got no brothers. He's got no father, and his mother is being held hostage. So the first thing he does after declaring himself Nasi is go out and try and get his mother. So he takes his entire army and goes to Jericho. And of course, Ptolemy displays the mother on the top walls of the castle to taunt her son down at the bottom, and humiliates her hugely in front of, and she was the queen, right? Or the queen, the ruler, or the ruler's wife, in front of the whole army, and has to tolerate all these beatings where her son is sitting watching what's happening. Ptolemy is exceedingly cruel. I mean, yeah, you can imagine this happening, as I said before, in Game of Thrones or Vikings or something like that. And they, as he is sieging Jericho, and John Hyrcanus is sitting watching what's going on, he gets information that Jerusalem is now under siege, and Antiochus is about to take Jerusalem. So he has to take his entire army and rush back to Jerusalem to try and take Jerusalem back. And when he tries to take Jerusalem back, it lands up being a long siege. It's nasty battles, and it drags on and on and on. He's exhausted. The Antiochus's army is actually also exhausted. And so a truce is actually made, but he loses a lot of the areas that have been taken by his dad and by his uncles. And he has to pay an enormous amount of tax to Syria for this truce, and he has to give a large amount of hostages as well. So he is really like down at the bottom of the heap at the moment, but at least he's alive, and he's secured a truce. So that is the year 135 BCE. Here we're going to have the story of John Hyrcanus. I'm going to attempt to share the screen this time. Let's try this. Try that one. Got it? You can see the screen. Here's John. I'm going to try doing this. Hang on, slideshow in the beginning. Let's go to John Hyrcanus. Now, if you have a look over here at John Hyrcanus, you can see, look at that pink. Okay, there's a lot of pink there, really a lot of pink. So John Hyrcanus reigns for a long time, 135 to 104. That's a very long rule for a king, but he's not a king. He's Nasi. Remember, he can't be king because he is still at that stage, still listening to the rabbis who have said, you cannot be king because you're not from the Davidic line. And now in 135, he's really just sitting in Jerusalem with a little bit of Judea around him, not much, and very insecure borders. But again, Providence intervenes, and the Seleucid Empire starts to fall apart at this stage. There's infighting, there's wars, and he takes advantage of this whole situation, and he starts to reclaim his borders back and more, and he starts to take more and more and more and more land. Look at all that pink there. This is the land that John Hyrcanus takes. So he is known to us as Yochanan HaKohen Gadol, John the High Priest, but in actual fact, he is taking, expanding borders like no one has expanded borders before, except maybe in King David's time. So these borders are huge. He is still the Kohen Gadol. He improves the temple. He does all sorts of this picture that I'm kind of obscuring here is a picture of his a picture of his tomb in Israel, and there's a picture down there of the Kohen Gadol, because we know John Hyrcanus as the Kohen Gadol, but of course he is also the Nasi. It's very, his is a very interesting story. I'm just gonna stop sharing for a second. Because he takes so much land, and he is now so powerful, the power starts to go to his head a little bit. Now, if you think of the Maccabees, like how we knew them before, think of Mattityahu. Why did he revolt? Because he was revolting against Hellenism. He was revolting against Jews taking on Greek habits and not being religious. It was, remember, it was a war, a civil war against traditional Jews versus like secular Jews, Hellenistic Jews. So, so one would think that this Hasmonean dynasty would be closely allied to the rabbis, right? That would make sense. But as time goes by, there's a split that starts to happen amongst the Jewish people. And this split is very, 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 very important, because the split is going to go right throughout the rest of this period until the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70 CE. So we are only now like in the, like up to, 104 when John Hyrcanus died. And there's a long time still to go of this terrible split that happens between the Jewish people. All right, so it splits like this. I'm going to share the screen. Let's see, share. And hopefully I can share it properly. All right, it splits into two groups, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. So the Hellenists have sort of gone by now, but we've got these two groups. We've got, remember the Hellenists were like the upper class and everyone else was like middle or lower class. So now there was the ruling family of priests. Remember those priests in the time of Chanukah, the high priest and their family were very corrupt, and you could sort of buy the high priesthood, all sorts of things. So that family was pushed aside when the Hasmoneans became the high priest. That family was called the family of Zadok. Okay, Zadok. That is how we get the word Zadokim, Sadducees. All right, and then we have another group who are like the separatists, even though they were there first. The separatists are the Pharisees, the Prushim. They separate because they're separating from Hellenism. So we've got the Sadducees on the one hand and the Pharisees on the other hand. The Sadducees don't believe in oral law. They believe in Torah as written Torah, but no Talmud, no oral law. So things, if they're written in the Torah, that's directly what the law should be. There's no interpretation of the law. It doesn't allow for any flexibility in the law at all. The law is what is written in the Torah. They don't believe in an afterlife. There's no life after death. They believe that the temple service is everything. So without the temple, then there's like no Judaism. The temple service is what they do, and they believe that's all important. They are the upper class, and they believe that the Sadducees should rule. For them now, unfortunately, they've been put aside, and we've got this Hasmonean dynasty who are much more aligned to Pharisees because they are the more traditional people. They are aligned to the Pharisees with the sages, who we know as the sages. We know like Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, and those are the Pharisees, all right, even though they come a bit later. So they believe, obviously, in the oral law, in the Talmud, and they believe that you cannot separate the written law from the oral law. The oral law is the explanation of the written law. They were the teachers of the people. They were very involved in educating everyone. And 75 to 80% of people were Pharisees. So when we talk about the split, it's not, it's not a 50-50 split. It's 75% of people are Pharisees. A very small percentage of people are Sadducees, but they've got a lot of power because they're the ruling upper class and they are very wealthy. Now, the Sadducees start to object to John Hyrcanus, and they start to have some fighting. They believe that they should be the high priest, and they start to cause a bit of a rift. And at the same time, whoopsies, let's just go back to John Hyrcanus. John Hyrcanus does some things that annoy the rabbis. This is important. He takes an area down here called Idumea. Can you see this big pink area here underneath Judea? It's called Idumea. The Idumeans were not Jewish, all right? And actually, in the time of like the Babylonian destruction of the first temple, they had allied for sure with the Babylonians to help destroy the temple and to help destroy the Jews. But the Idumeans were absolutely not Jewish, and they were often fighting Judea. But John Hyrcanus went and took Idumea. He won it over, but he didn't just take it. He converted all the people to Judaism. This never happened. It's very, very difficult to convert to Judaism. We know that it's very difficult to convert to Judaism. We don't just willingly convert people. But he literally said conversion was compulsory. I don't know if there's any other case in Jewish history where this has really happened. He took all the men and had them circumcised, and everybody literally had to walk through a river, and that was their mikvah. So it was, bris and mikvah, and now they're all Jewish. And this came back to haunt him much later on, because Herod, who was the hated king of Israel, just before the destruction of the temple, Herod, who betrayed the Jewish people many times over to the Romans. Herod was an Idumean, okay, direct descendant of someone who had been converted by John Hyrcanus. And the rabbis objected strongly to this. But John Hyrcanus had, like by now, he was like, he felt he was doing very well for himself. He captured all this territory. He was very famous. And he believed that what he was doing was the right thing. And so he didn't listen. And he started getting annoyed with the rabbis because they're telling him all these things, that he should be doing, he shouldn't be doing. And so slowly he started to move towards the Sadducees, towards the Sadducees, rather than the Pharisees. And this started to cause a rift in the Jewish people. The Pharisees were, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. The Pharisees were very upset by this. And obviously then, 80% of the population was very upset by it. And even though we can see that John Hyrcanus managed to do all these wonderful things, like establish peace for Israel, increase the borders phenomenally, revamp the temple, do all sorts of things. When he died, he wasn't mourned by the people. They were upset with him. He had betrayed the people, in their opinion, and he had also killed some Pharisees. So when there were Pharisees that were objecting to things, he knocked them off. So he was not as popular as he should have been when he died. And there was already now quite a big rift between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Okay, who comes next? Because Yochanan dies in 104, and he says after he's died, his wife is supposed to rule. That's the plan. But he has a very, very power-hungry son called Aristobulus. I told you these names are going to be super difficult. This is Aristobulus the first. Okay, Yehuda Aristobulus. We've got the Yehuda. You can hear the names are becoming progressively more Greek. So John Hyrcanus has a Yehuda Aristobulus. And Yehuda Aristobulus does not like the fact at all that he has not been chosen to rule and that his mother has been chosen to rule. So what does he do? He imprisons his mother and his other brothers in a prison. He starves them, and he takes the mantle of the king. But now remember, he's now very much allied to the Sadducees, to the Sadducees. So it doesn't matter what the rabbis are saying. So the rabbis say, well, you can't be king because you're not a king, because you're not from the line of David. And he says, I don't care. I'm a king. So Aristobulus calls himself king. He sends he has one brother that he likes. So there's one brother that is not in jail. His name is Antigonus. He sends Antigonus over to the Galilee to go and secure some more borders. He marries a very nice woman. It's the only thing that he actually does right. Her name is Salome, or Shlomtzion, or Shlomit, Alexandra. Okay, she's got the Alexandra in there because you need to have a Greek name as well. But she's called sometimes Shlomit, sometimes she's called Salome, and sometimes she's called Shlomtzion, but she is the same person. She's lovely, and her brother is actually head of the Pharisees, believe it or not. And Aristobulus is very much not a fan of Pharisees. He is very much a Sadducee at this point. But he marries this woman who is clearly aligned with the Pharisees. I don't think she has much say in what he does. But he is now battling people in the north, and he is having a nice life for 1 year. He's king for 1 year, because at the end of that 1 year, he gets a terrible stomach ailment and he dies. That is Yehuda Aristobulus. He dies. And when he dies, by the way, I have to tell you, he also, by mistake, has his brother killed. His one brother that he did love, the brother called Antigonus. Antigonus gets killed as well in that 1 year. So he's had 1 year of terror, a reign of terror, where he's also killed his brother. His other brothers are languishing in a prison along with his mother, who are being starved in this prison. And he dies a lonely death with a very terrible stomach ailment. Start sharing. Hang on a sec. Share the screen. Right, let's see if we can show you Aristobulus. Right, that's Yehuda Aristobulus the first. You can see that reign is for 1 year, 104 to 103, and you can see that pink on top there. That's the Galilee, and he's taken the Galilee, but it was actually his brother that took the Galilee. His brother Antigonus, that he then had killed. He was very upset though that he died, and then he died very shortly after. So now there's no more Yehuda Aristobulus. Who comes next? Still got a wife, right? She's still alive. Salome, Shlomtzion. Shlomtzion, straight away, as soon as Aristobulus has died, she releases her mother-in-law and all the other brothers from prison. They get released, and this is who becomes king next, Alexander Yannai, or Janeus. He is king, as you can see, for a very long time, 103 to 76 BCE. Okay, and he makes anything that any of the other kings have done seem mild. He is like crazy, Alexander Yannai. He is absolutely for sure something from a movie, that Netflix movie series. He is, besides having a very nice wife, Shlomtzion, Alexander Yannai pretty much is a warring general who has expansionist policies. He just literally wants to expand his empire as much as possible. And his first 15 years of being on the throne are literally filled with war. There's only wars. I'm going to just move myself here in a second so you can see all that pink. You can see all that pink there? All right, lots and lots and lots of pink. He takes all this land. So now we can see Edomia is still in there, right? Now all this green bits, all this green bit here is the green bit that was there from his brother and his father and his uncles, and yeah, so you can see how it goes further back. But the pink is the bit that he's now captured, which is a lot. So he spends 15 years getting this land. A lot of Jewish people are killed in these battles, so he gets the land. He's very unpopular because of all this Jewish blood that has been spilt, increasing his territory. He's got ideas of becoming, like the next empire. For all he knows, this is Judea. It's like the next Seleucid empire. I mean, he just keeps on expanding and expanding. He doesn't know that Judea is not going to get any bigger than his land, because of course we don't know what's going to happen next. So Alexander Yannai spends his life pretty much in battle, and then once he's solidified all this territory, he then comes back to Judea. And the next phase of his career as king, of course, he is king. He calls himself king and high priest. The rabbis are very much objecting to him being a high priest, because shouldn't be a high priest, right? Look at what he's done. I mean, he's an army general. He's been fighting. He's killed tons of people. That shouldn't be what a high priest does. And also, he shouldn't be a king because he's not from the line of David. So the Pharisees are very annoyed with him. There's terrible infighting between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And he comes back home basically to a civil war that's happening at home. And next thing that he does is he really makes the civil war a whole lot worse, because I'm going to tell you right now. Alexander Yannai, basically, remember I told you he is Sadducee. He doesn't like the Pharisees. And so anything that's like Talmud based, then he's not interested in, because the Sadducees only believe in Torah law. So there's this thing that everyone does every year. They have on Sukkot something called the water libation. So when there was a temple, they take water from the pool of Siloam. They'll take that water and then they bring it up and they pour it on the temple. And it's like a big party. This is like seriously big party time in the ancient Israel. And of course, it's something that's mentioned in the oral law. It's not in the Torah law. So Alexander Yannai is angry with the Pharisees. This water libation comes up. This is the year 95 BCE. The water comes up. And what does he do? Instead of pouring the water on the altar, he pours the water on his feet. Why? Because to show that he is like in disagreement with the Pharisees. Well, everyone there pretty much, remember I told you like 85% of people are Pharisees. All the people in the temple courtyard are Pharisees. They see this, they actually cannot believe their high priest has just done this. This is the Kohen Gadol and their king. And they do the most crazy thing. They take their etrog, and they pelt Alexander Yannai with etrogs. And can you actually imagine the scene? There's like thousands. There was 6,000 people approximately in the courtyard. 6,000 people are pelting their king with an etrog. Okay, it's a crazy image. But anyway, he in shock and horror tells his mercenaries to just kill everyone in the courtyard. The mercenaries, Alexander Yannai's mercenaries were mostly not Jewish. He always employed these mercenaries to help him in battle. And they just go out and they kill all these Pharisees in the courtyard. About 6,000 people were killed, were murdered that day on Sukkot. So a civil war begins, actually not for another couple of years miraculously, but when it begins in earnest. And the civil war is terrible. There's about 50,000 Jews that are killed in the civil war on both sides. And I mean, can you actually imagine? So he's got all this territory, and it looks like this like unbelievable big country with these incredible borders now. But this is this war that is then happening between Jews. So Jews fighting Jews. About 50,000 Jews died during this time. Alexander Yannai takes 800 Pharisees on one day, 800 Pharisees, and crucifies them. Did you know that? Did you know that there was a Jewish king that crucified 800 rabbis on one day? Like, unforgivable. Anyway, towards the end of his life, his last 10 years of his life, he realizes what he's done, and he's like, does tshuva, and he realizes he's made tons of mistakes, and he starts to realize that this war between the Pharisees and the Sadducees can't go on anymore. And he says to his wife on his deathbed, basically, I want you to negotiate with the Pharisees. I want them to have much more power. And the last few years of Alexander Yannai's reign are actually very, very peaceful, happy years for the Jewish people in Judea. Hard to imagine after the terrible reign that he had, shocking reign, he does change his mind, and he does change, which in itself is amazing. And there is suddenly peace in the land, and there's these huge borders, so there's no real threat, and peace in the land. When he dies, his wife, Shlomtzion, Salome, who's now outlived 2 crazy husbands, becomes queen. She is, I'm going to share, hang on a sec, let's share this. Let me share it. Salome. I've got one pink screen. So Salome becomes queen. It is the best 10 years in Judea's history. Basically, she's an excellent queen. There's no more, you see, I don't have any maps there, right? Because she's not trying to expand any territories. She doesn't really care about expanding territories like a warmongering husband. She just would like to consolidate the country and make the country a peaceful, happy place, which is what a monarch should be doing. But she's the only one so far that's really tried to do this and had the ability to do it, because her borders are so expansive. Remember I said before, her brother was head of the Pharisees, Shimon ben Shattach. is head of the Pharisees, and she makes him governor. And so now the Pharisees are in charge. The people are happy because 80% of them are Pharisees. The Sadducees, the Sadducees, are not happy, but they haven't got a choice because the queen is a Pharisee, right? And the queen is in charge of everything. And it's like a really lovely, peaceful reign. So we've got 10 years of bliss in Judea. She increases education of children. They've got Torah education. People are becoming more religious. Everything's lovely. And things look like they, could go well from here. But of course, this is the Hasmonean dynasty. And so nothing goes well in the Hasmonean dynasty, right? 10 years apiece. She has 2 children who spend their life fighting each other. Okay? These Hasmoneans are obviously brought up fairly spoilt. They've been brought up, royalty, and each one believes that he should be the ruler. What happens with Shalom Tzion is she makes her older son, who is now called, now do not get confused, John Hyrcanus. Remember, we already had a John Hyrcanus. John Hyrcanus before was her husband's father. That was John Hyrcanus the first. Now we're going to have John Hyrcanus the second. Her older son's name is John Hyrcanus, not the second, but he is John Hyrcanus the second. We're just going to call him Hyrcanus for the moment, otherwise it's going to be too confusing. Hyrcanus is the older son, and he's made high priest. She's scared to give her second son, whose name is Yehuda Aristobulus II, right? She's scared to give him any power because he is a crazy, jealous, power-hungry, envious, violent man like her husband. And so she realizes she shouldn't be giving him any power. So she gives power to John Hyrcanus. She makes him high priest. Let's call him Hyrcanus. Hyrcanus has now got power. He's high priest. She's still alive. On her deathbed, her second son, Aristobulus, is nagging her, please, I need some power. Give me power. I want to be ruler. My brother doesn't want to be ruler. I want to be ruler. John Hyrcanus, or Hyrcanus, is high priest. He's actually a much more passive person. He is actually quite weak. He really doesn't have to have power. Like he doesn't mind if he doesn't care if he isn't the king. He's quite happy being a high priest. He doesn't need extra power than he's got, but he's got, a significant amount of power anyway because he's high priest. But his brother is a totally different person. And of course, Hyrcanus is quite a weak person. So on Shalom Tzion's deathbed, she's got Aristobulus begging her for more temples, for more land, and for more power. And she's exhausted, right? She's had to deal with 2 crazy husbands. She's had her own reign. She's quite old by now. And she's got these 2 kids who are just battling each other the entire time. I mean, she's finished and she's sick and she's old. And she just says, you know what, I don't know, just do what you want. And then she dies. And the Pharisees in charge are going like, what do you mean, like, do what you want? Like, he can't have any power. So Aristobulus II goes and joins with the Sadducees, naturally, with the Sadducees. That's his natural ally. So he's got a whole group that are going to ally with him, Sadducees. And John Hyrcanus is head of, he's the high priest, so he's got the Pharisees behind him. There's battling between the 2 brothers. John Hyrcanus is happy he loses a battle. He says, you know what, just take everything. You can be in charge, Aristobulus. And remember I told you those Edomians are going to come back to haunt the Jewish people? Well, they do. Let me just go in here. That's the split. You can see with Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II, you can see that chain breaking. This is going to be the end of the Hasmonean dynasty. Okay. Remember I told you about those Edomians? Well, the head of the Edomians was a man called Antipater. It's a name you shouldn't forget because it's different to all the other names that we've had so far. Antipater is a power-hungry man. He was a general for Alexander Yannai, and he loves power, loves power. This is Herod's father, Antipater. Antipater goes to John Hyrcanus and he says, John, I see you don't want to be, you don't care if you're not high priest anymore. And you think you're going to live a nice, peaceful, happy life without your evil, warmongering brother. Well, that's not the case. Your brother's going to kill you the minute that he's finished with you. That's going to be the end of you. And John goes, oh, maybe I should actually battle my brother. Maybe I should try and take the high priesthood back. And this battle starts between John Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, but it's actually not John Hyrcanus so much, it's more Antipater. Antipater is telling Hyrcanus what to do the whole time, and Hyrcanus is kind of weak. And these two brothers are fighting away. There's this terrible war. It's reaching a stalemate. Everyone's starving in Jerusalem because Aristobulus is in the Temple Mount, and Hyrcanus has surrounded it. There's not enough food. Everyone's hungry. There's not enough sacrifices. Hyrcanus listens to Antipater so much that he actually sends a pig over the wall to as a sacrifice. I mean, can you believe it? He is the high priest. He's the high priest that's just sent a pig over the wall for a sacrifice. Doesn't make any sense at all, which just goes to show that it's not John Hyrcanus that is making all these decisions. It's Antipater making the decisions. The Edomian. And guess what they do? They're fighting so much that they decide maybe they should ask someone to help them make this decision who's going to win. Now, who is the power ascending in the world at the moment? It's not the Greeks. The Greeks have gone. Pretty much the Seleucid Empire has withered away. The Ptolemaic Empire has withered away. And who is the dominant empire that's going to take over the whole world? Rome. Pompey has come down now from Rome. He's in Syria. He's taken Syria, and he's got his eye on Judea. He's right by Judea. The John Hyrcanus had actually made an alliance with Rome before, and so Rome would maybe not have gone in and invaded Judea, but Alexander Yannai sort of let that alliance slip. And so his two boys, his two sons, didn't really have an alliance with Rome. These sons are kind of nervous what Pompey is going to do. So they think maybe if they invite Pompey in, then he won't fight them. He'll just come and settle their dispute, and he'll pick one of them rather than kill them both and take over the whole area. So Pompey comes in, and Pompey, he sees these two brothers fighting. He sees Judea is weak because there's no one person in charge of Judea. So, it's perfect for him to take over. And he goes, okay, he starts taking bribes. And Aristobulus gives him the biggest bribe. So he rules in favor of Aristobulus. But then Antipater is a very smart general, and of course is the mouthpiece for Hyrcanus, goes up to him and says, you don't want Aristobulus as your ally, because Aristobulus is going to fight you the entire time. The person you want as your ally is Hyrcanus, because he's weak. He's not going to fight you. You make Hyrcanus the head, and he'll do everything that you say he must do. And that's what he does. He makes Pompey makes John Hyrcanus II in charge. He takes Aristobulus with him to Rome, parades in there with his family, and John Hyrcanus is now in charge of, John Hyrcanus II is now in charge of Judea and all the land that they have. It's actually diminished, some of that land. Pompey has decided that it's way too much territory for him to have. They have to pay very heavy taxes to Rome. They have to give tributes to Rome, and they're basically a vassal state of Rome. So the Hasmoneans have essentially invited the Romans in to come and take their own land. And gradually, we know Rome takes more and more of a hold. Hyrcanus, in the end, actually gets assassinated by Antipater's son, Herod, who he actually rescues at one point. But Herod is a crazy king, crazy. Remember, he is Antipater's son. He is an Edomian. He has no claim to the throne at all. But his claim actually is that he marries John Hyrcanus II's granddaughter. Her name is Miriam, or we know her as Mariamna. And Herod marries her. She is the last of the Hasmoneans. Of course, like he does with everyone else, he murders her and murders her children. And now there are no more Hasmoneans left. Absolutely none. Herod is in charge, but in actual fact, it's not Herod, it's Rome. And so, basically, in what we now have is a Hasmonean dynasty that's come to an end. It started off, beginning its journey with such pure intentions to rid Judea of Hellenism, to restore the temple, to make Judea a religious Jewish place where Jews could live freely and practice Judaism freely. And unfortunately, power hunger, infighting, greed, all of that has unfortunately brought an end to this dynasty that started off with such pure intentions. There was hatred of fellow Jews that became a social norm in this place. And what could have been an era of peace and stability in the land really turned into a bloody civil war, a war that ultimately led to Rome coming into the land and ultimately led to the destruction of the Second Temple. So, which begins for us, we know, a 2,000-year-long exile and, an incredibly arduous, difficult journey ahead for the Jewish people. So what could have been a wonderful, stable time turned into what we know as our Jewish history from today. So yeah, I hope this has been an enjoyable talk. I hope I didn't confuse you with too many names, because there are, as I said before, there are so many names. So I try to sort of make it into a story that I hope was understandable and intriguing to listen to. And I hope that now when you go into Chanukah, you're going with a very much deeper understanding of what Chanukah really is and of who these Hasmoneans really were and the real story behind the story of Chanukah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Bev, and a round of applause for this, yet again, another very successful series. And hopefully we can convince Bev to do something for us in 2021. We'll have to see what area of Jewish history, but we would love to host you again for another round of history series. And thank you everyone for participating. It's so good to see so many people, given that we're now out of lockdown and people are out, so still so many people coming to watch and listen is amazing. So it's just a testament to you, Bev. And we want to wish you all a happy Chanukah. In terms of other events coming up at South Caulfield, sure, just to let you know, on Tuesday night, there's a very interesting speaker who many people might want to hear. His name's Yahya Mohammed. He's an Israeli Arab, and he talks about his story about joining the IDF. And we actually had him booked a few weeks ago, and when he was due to speak, he was on a contingent to Dubai, and the internet wasn't working. So we've rescheduled him for Tuesday night at 8 o'clock. So anyone's welcome to join. And once again, big thank you to Bev, and we hope you have a wonderful Chanukah. Thank you, everybody.
And